It was recently announced that Lily Collins and her husband welcomed a new baby via surrogate, and this is a growing trend among female celebrities in Hollywood. They have the means to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars at times on surrogates to carry their children instead of themselves, and they also lack the desire to carry their own children based on concerns about vanity or perhaps what they claim are concerns about health. Really, I find it interesting that this has sparked a conversation about the sanctity of life and the ethics of practices like IVF and surrogacy among people I never would have thought it interested, including self-professed feminists, leftists, liberals in general who value human choice above all things, especially in issues of sexuality. So after it was announced that Lily Collins used a surrogate to birth her baby, it sparked a massive controversy online, and I saw a lot of critical responses. One person said, "People make a lot of comparisons to The Handmaid's Tale, but surrogacy is actually the closest equivalent." And I guess if you're unfamiliar with the practice, it basically means that you select a woman who wants to rent out her womb to gestate another couple's child. And for context here, all surrogacy pregnancies are high-risk pregnancies because, generally speaking, this surrogate is carrying the genetic material of two unrelated people to themselves. So their body is at an incredibly high risk for rejecting that fetus and also going into preterm labor. And there are a lot of aspects to it that people don't know about, like the kind of bonding that happens between an unborn child and the mother who births this child. It's incredibly traumatic for the child to be separated from its birth mother, regardless of the circumstances. But it tends to be celebrities who make use of this the most. And I think it really comes down to vanity and selfishness. And I think they're using surrogacy as a status symbol. It's sort of like having bragging rights that you're so rich and high status that you don't have to do lowly human things like giving birth. So I saw one other take that said, the future, pregnancy is for poor women.
Yeah.
It's similar to rich women hiring wet nurses back in the day. They would hire lower status women to breastfeed their children because it's seen as a status symbol to not have to engage in something like that. It's like low or like earthly in some way.
Yeah.
You know?
We have the statement from her husband here, who I guess they did read a lot of the comments.
Oh, I see.
I mean, it's fair enough that apparently this is a discussion that isn't just staying in like the bowels of Twitter.
It's going further than that.
So he says, "Thank you for all the kind messages and love. We are overjoyed and very grateful. In regards to the unkind messages about surrogacy and our path to having a baby, it's okay to not be an expert on surrogacy. It's okay to not know why someone might need a surrogate to have a child. It's okay to not know the motivations of a surrogate regardless of what you assume. And it's okay to spend less time spewing hateful words in the world, especially in regards to a beautiful baby girl who has brought a lot of love into people's lives. That's all for now because she just pooped and I need to change her diaper."
Look, I'm sure that he has a clouded judgment because he loves his child. But what he isn't acknowledging, it is kind of disingenuous, is that no one was saying anything hateful about the child.
Yes, it's a straw man argument to say that this is a hateful discussion. If anything, these tend to be... Okay, so some people will go with shock factor when they bring up these topics, but for the most part, to engage in this discussion at all involves a certain level of nuance that means you have to care a lot about it.
Yeah.
Like I said, again, this is one of those topics that's going to interest Mary a whole lot. And for me, when I come across this topic, I'm like, my instinct is that money shouldn't be involved. My instinct is that money shouldn't change hands for something like this.
That is the law of the land in Canada, from what I hear.
Yeah.
You are allowed to have a surrogate in Canada, but you're not allowed to have any sort of financial transaction involved. And I oppose it whole cloth. Like, I don't think that this should be legal in any circumstances, especially because you are commodifying the children.
Yeah.
And you're also inherently traumatizing the children. Once they're born, they are traumatized by being separated from the birth mother. So there is literally no way to avoid that. And it's nonsensical to me when you clearly have the option to adopt. But you just don't want to do that because there is an element of status seeking in paying for this luxury service.
It reminded me of the story where Jim Caviezel, who is a very pro-life person, obviously, played Jesus Christ in Passion of the Christ. He had a pro-choice friend who basically, he did the argument that they always do. He says, well, if you're so pro-life, why don't you adopt children from a foreign country? And if you do that, I will change my position on pro-life. And we all know that that's bait and that's not going to actually happen.
Yeah.
He did do that. He did adopt children from, I believe it was China. And then the guy didn't change his position.
Oh.
Shocking.
Surprise, surprise.
Shocking.
Well, I'm sure that he planned to do that anyway. And it's not like the choice to adopt or not adopt legitimizes the moral
Well, you're
argument.
accepting their moral framework when you acquiesce.
Exactly. But, you know, I feel bad for her husband who clearly doesn't understand the argument that's being posed. It has nothing to do with Lily Collins. It has nothing to do with any particular person who's using a surrogate for their child. It's about the practice in general. And it just so happens that these high profile, high status, very wealthy people are the ones who use surrogates the most. Yeah. And it's primarily being shown to us through entertainers. And I saw some people pointing out that it's because they have a special interest in this. One person said, just such a coincidence how so many rich women whose careers are built around their physical attractiveness have to use surrogates, isn't it? Another mystery we'll never get to the bottom of. So basically they're saying that Lily Collins felt she had to choose a surrogate to have a child because she is on camera so much that she needs to maintain her figure and cannot undergo the changes.
I would be interested to see if this is happening when we talk about high-level CEOs with wives. Are they having surrogates, or is the husband insistent that they actually have the child, right? Because she's not a front-facing person who needs to be on camera. It would be interesting to know where this trend lives and dies.
They also claimed that Lily Collins needed a surrogate for health reasons and that she was deemed medically infertile due to a history of eating disorders. I know that she has publicly talked about having anorexia. I don't know the current status of that, but they were claiming that, she might not be able to get pregnant because of that. That might very well be true. It still doesn't make the decision to hire a surrogate ethical. Yeah. It doesn't. And it's a sympathetic reason that you can offer for it. But they're also claiming, in her husband's statement, they're claiming we don't need a reason. Yeah. We don't need a justification, and you don't get to have one. Well, when you tell the world that you used a surrogate to have a child, there are going to be questions about that. There are going to be people who oppose that.
Downside of being a public figure.
It is what it is. Yep. Another person said, I don't know where on the political spectrum this opinion falls, but I think the concept of a womb for hire is egregiously exploitative. Another said, rich people renting out poorer women's bodies so they don't have to birth their own babies is creepy, and it's weird to me that so many don't see how gross and dystopian this practice is. So these are takes coming from ostensibly left-wing people who ostensibly have very liberal opinions about human sexuality and issues of life, probably people who are pro-choice even. But they have concerns about the ethics of surrogacy, and it's becoming increasingly relevant. I just saw last year this movie called The Pod Generation, which is a kind of a sci-fi take on the whole thing. What if we got to a point where artificial wombs were the norm, and you basically were incentivized to use one of these artificial wombs by your employer? They would even pay for it. because it makes you a more efficient worker.
Like sending them to another state to have an abortion rather than paying for maternity
It's not too
leave.
far off from reality.
It's not.
And that movie wasn't great, but it was definitely an interesting concept, and it feels so much closer to reality than fiction. And it's going to be maybe not artificial wombs close in the future, but surrogacy is going to be way more accessible, in my prediction. And it's not going to be necessarily something for the ultra wealthy anymore. And it's going to be far more common. I noticed too that like even the surrogates aren't even like paid that well.
Yeah, that seems to be like, we were shocked the last time we covered this, how low the...
sometimes like 60 to 80 grand, which is like significantly less than a lot of like fake email jobs could give you.
Yep.
And to literally give your body to these people who are like legally interested in it. And there are disputes that come up. Like I remember this one case that happened in the UK where this surrogate was... she was somewhere along in her pregnancy. Doctors find out that the fetus has Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. And then the parents try to legally force this woman to get an abortion.
And she
refused. She refused, but they really tried to force her with basically saying like, we own your womb and we own whatever is in it, so we have the final say. Yeah. It's sickening. Yeah. And people just don't think about the consequences. Like it sounds like, it sounds like
a rare example, but once you hear it, it's like, okay, how can you actually know that that's one of the possible outcomes and still be okay with it?
It's literally love is love for reproduction purposes. One of the very few takes I saw in defense of Lily Collins said, "The hate for surrogacy is so crazy to me. Not every woman is able to have biological children, and not all of them want to adopt, which is unfortunate, but it's their choice. I think we should all just mind our own damn business." It's a lot more complicated than that. It always is. And if you don't want to adopt, well, I'm sorry, but your desire is not the end all be all. And you are not entitled to another human being. That's literally what slavery is.
I remember there was an episode of House where there's a child with severe autism, and they have a whole discussion about how the parents were both, high earning executives who lived in the city. And then when they had a child with autism, they had to move to the suburbs and take jobs that made less money because they had to spend more time at home with the child. You don't get to choose. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the point, is there's this really, really amazing moment at the end where the kid has a real moment of human connection with the house character, and the parents are overjoyed. It's the simplest thing in the world to a normal child, but to them it was the most amazing thing in the entire world. The point was to show you that they're grading on a curve because their child doesn't behave the way a normal child does, but they didn't have a say in the matter, and they have to accept what it is,
right,
for what it is.
Yeah, and believing that your desire as an individual is tantamount, it completely runs headlong into the entire calling of parenthood, which is to not put yourself first before your child.
There's also a great episode of The X-Files called Eve that involves discussion of eugenics and in vitro fertilization, and that was back in 1993. That's the more evil side of things. I recommend going and watching that episode.
I don't know if I remember that.
It's the one.
Like I watched all of them, but I didn't.
It's got the evil twins, the daughters, and they're all they all look the same. They're all called Eve, and this lady worked at an IVF clinic, and they were doing these experiments. It was very early on in the 90s, so this was a very different. It was a very different discussion to talk about IVF back in 1993 than it is now. And certainly if you watch that episode, you didn't want to have a child via IVF after, the evil daughters kill their own parent or kill their adopted parents.
I mean, it's been around for longer than people really realize, but it's definitely far more common these days.
Yes. Oh yeah. It was
than it was back then.
Very different discussion back then.
Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.